There was a time in America when supper didn't need hours in the kitchen or expensive ingredients. In countless homes, when the clock moved fast and money was tight, families relied on simple meals that could be cooked in minutes. These quick suppers came from old cookbooks, handwritten recipe cards, and the quiet wisdom of generations who knew how to turn the simplest pantry items into something warm and satisfying. Many of these dishes have slowly disappeared from modern tables, replaced by convenience foods and fast drive-through meals. But once, they were everyday lifesavers. Today, we're bringing back 10 cheap vintage suppers you can still make in about 10 minutes. Creamed chipped beef on toast. Long before frozen dinners and fast food drive-thrus became common, many American kitchens relied on a simple dish that could be made in minutes: creamed chipped beef on toast. During the early and mid-1900s, this meal appeared in countless homes, especially when families needed something filling, warm, and inexpensive. The ingredients were humble: dried salted beef, butter, flour, milk, and a few slices of toast, but together they created a creamy, comforting supper that could stretch to feed several people. The dish became especially well known during the 1930s and 1940s. In difficult economic times, households learned to rely on preserved foods that lasted a long time in the pantry. Dried beef was perfect for this. It required no refrigeration and could quickly transform into a hearty meal with just a little milk and flour. Many parents could prepare the entire dish in about 10 minutes while children waited around the table after a long day. To make it, butter melted in a skillet first. Thin slices of dried beef were added and gently warmed. Then flour was stirred in to form a simple roux, followed by milk that slowly thickened into a creamy sauce. Within minutes, the salty beef blended into the rich white gravy. Poured generously over toasted bread, the result was warm, filling, and surprisingly satisfying. In many homes, this quick supper became a familiar sight on busy evenings. It was not fancy, but it was dependable. Families gathered around small kitchen tables, plates of toast covered in creamy gravy placed in front of them, and supper was ready almost as quickly as the day had ended. Today, this once common meal is rarely seen on dinner tables. Yet it remains one of the fastest and most affordable vintage suppers that once helped countless families get through busy nights with something warm and comforting to share. Tuna pea skillet supper. In many American kitchens during the 1940s and 1950s, canned food was considered a quiet miracle of convenience. It could sit in the pantry for months, waiting for the exact moment when a quick meal was needed. One of the most dependable combinations from that era was the simple tuna and pea skillet supper, a dish that could be ready in about 10 minutes and still feel warm, filling, and comforting after a long day. Canned tuna had become widely popular by the mid-20th century. It was affordable, easy to store, and packed with protein. Frozen peas, which were becoming more common in grocery stores after World War II, added color and a gentle sweetness to the dish. Together, they created a quick supper that many families relied on when there was little time to cook. The meal usually began with a small skillet warming on the stove. A little butter melted in the pan, followed by a handful of cooked egg noodles or sometimes leftover pasta from the night before. Then came the canned tuna, gently broken into chunks, and a cup of bright green peas. Many home cooks added a splash of milk or a spoonful of cream soup to bring everything together into a soft, creamy mixture. Within minutes, the skillet filled with a comforting aroma that drifted through the kitchen. The noodles soaked up the flavor, the peas softened slightly, and the tuna blended into the dish. It wasn't complicated, but it was dependable and satisfying. For families balancing busy evenings, this meal was a small relief. It required no complicated steps and very little preparation. Everything came together quickly, often while the table was already being set. Today, this humble tuna and pea skillet supper is rarely mentioned in modern cookbooks. Yet for many families decades ago, it was one of the simplest and quickest ways to turn a few pantry staples into a warm and comforting evening meal. Egg and potato hash. In many American homes of the early 20th century, nothing in the kitchen was wasted. Leftovers from the previous day often became the foundation for the next meal, and one of the quickest ways to turn those scraps into supper was a simple egg and potato hash. It was hearty, inexpensive, and could be ready in about 10 minutes. This dish became especially common during the 1920s through the 1940s, when stretching ingredients was a daily habit in many households. Potatoes were one of the most dependable foods in the pantry. They were cheap, filling, and easy to store for long periods. Eggs, often gathered fresh from backyard chickens in rural areas, added protein and turned the dish into a complete meal. The preparation was simple and familiar in countless kitchens. A skillet was placed on the stove with a small amount of butter or bacon grease. Diced potatoes, sometimes left over from breakfast or the previous night's dinner, were tossed into the pan and fried until their edges became golden and crisp. The sizzling sound filled the kitchen as the potatoes browned. Once the potatoes were ready, eggs were cracked directly into the skillet. Some cooks scrambled them into the potatoes, while others let the eggs cook whole on top. A pinch of salt and pepper was usually all the seasoning needed. Within minutes, the eggs set, the potatoes crisped further, and supper was ready. The beauty of egg and potato hash was its flexibility. If there were bits of onion, leftover ham, or a few vegetables in the kitchen, they could easily be added. But even in its simplest form, the dish was satisfying enough to fill hungry stomachs after a long day. Today, this quick skillet meal has faded from many dinner tables. Yet for generations of families, egg and potato hash was one of the fastest ways to turn humble ingredients into a warm, comforting supper. Fried bologna supper plate. For many American families in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, a package of bologna in the refrigerator meant supper could be ready in minutes. Bologna was inexpensive, easy to store, and surprisingly versatile. When time was short and the pantry felt nearly empty, a simple fried bologna supper plate often came to the rescue. Unlike complicated meals that required careful preparation, this dish relied on speed and simplicity. A few slices of bologna were placed directly into a hot skillet. As the heat rose, the edges began to curl and the surface browned slightly, releasing a smoky, savory aroma that filled the kitchen. Some cooks made a small cut along the edge of the slice to keep it from curling too much as it fried. While the bologna sizzled in the pan, slices of bread were toasted or lightly buttered. In many homes, the meal was served open-faced on toast, though others preferred placing the fried bologna between two slices of bread for a quick sandwich. Sometimes a fried egg was added on top, turning the dish into a heartier supper. On the side, families might serve simple pantry staples like canned beans, sliced tomatoes, or pickles. The entire meal could come together in about 10 minutes, making it perfect for evenings when the day had been long and energy was running low. This kind of supper reflected a time when practicality mattered more than presentation. The ingredients were ordinary, but the meal was warm, filling, and dependable. Children often remembered the familiar sound of bologna sizzling in the skillet and the smell drifting through the house. Today, fried bologna suppers rarely appear in modern cookbooks. Yet decades ago, this humble plate was a reliable solution for busy families who needed something quick, affordable, and satisfying to bring everyone together around the table. Hamburger gravy on bread. In many American homes during the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, ground beef was often stretched to feed an entire family. When time was short and ingredients were limited, one dependable meal appeared again and again on supper tables: hamburger gravy served over bread. It was simple, filling, and could be ready in about 10 minutes. Ground beef was considered a practical ingredient because a small amount could flavor an entire skillet of gravy. Families learned how to make the most of it, especially during years when budgets were tight and grocery money had to last the entire week. With only a handful of ingredients, cooks could transform ground beef into a warm, satisfying meal. The process usually started with a skillet heating on the stove. A portion of ground beef was placed into the pan and broken apart with a spoon as it browned. The sizzling meat filled the kitchen with a rich aroma that signaled supper was already on its way. Once the beef was fully cooked, a little flour was sprinkled over the meat and stirred in. This created the base for the gravy. Slowly, milk or sometimes water was added while the mixture was stirred constantly. Within minutes, the liquid thickened into a creamy gravy that coated every piece of beef. Slices of toasted bread were placed on plates, and the hot hamburger gravy was poured generously over the top. The bread soaked up the rich sauce, turning a few simple ingredients into a surprisingly hearty meal. For many families, this supper appeared on evenings when there was little time or energy for elaborate cooking. It was dependable, affordable, and filling enough to satisfy hungry stomachs after a long day. Today, hamburger gravy on bread has mostly disappeared from modern dinner tables. But for generations of families, it was one of the quickest ways to create a warm and comforting supper from the simplest ingredients in the kitchen. Tomato soup and buttered crackers supper. In many American homes during the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, supper did not always require a full stove of pots and pans. Sometimes the simplest meals were the ones families remembered most. One of those quiet, dependable suppers was tomato soup served with buttered crackers, a meal that could be prepared in minutes and still bring a feeling of warmth to the table. Canned tomato soup became widely popular in the early 20th century. It was affordable, easy to store in the pantry, and required only a few minutes on the stove. For families balancing busy evenings or stretching a tight grocery budget, it offered a quick solution that still felt comforting. Preparing the meal was almost effortless. A can of tomato soup was poured into a small pot and gently warmed over the stove. Many cooks added milk instead of water, creating a richer and creamier flavor. As the soup slowly heated, its familiar tangy aroma filled the kitchen, often signaling to everyone in the house that supper would soon be ready. Alongside the soup came a simple but satisfying addition: buttered crackers. Saltine crackers were the most common choice. A thin layer of butter was spread across each cracker, adding a soft, savory taste that paired perfectly with the warm soup. Some families crushed the crackers directly into the bowl, while others dipped them slowly, letting them soften in the soup. Although this meal was incredibly simple, it carried a sense of comfort that many families appreciated after a long day. Children often enjoyed the ritual of dipping crackers into the warm bowl, while parents valued how quickly the entire meal came together. Today, tomato soup and buttered crackers may seem almost too simple to be considered supper. Yet for generations of American families, it was a reliable and comforting meal that proved even the most basic ingredients could bring warmth to the table. Cornbread and milk bowl. During the 1930s and 1940s, cornbread paired with a simple bowl of milk was one of the quiet, reliable suppers in many American homes. It required very little preparation, cost almost nothing, and could be ready in about 10 minutes if cornbread had been baked ahead of time. For families facing long days and tight budgets, this humble meal offered a surprising sense of comfort and fullness. Cornbread itself was a staple of many households, particularly in rural areas or regions where wheat was expensive. Made from cornmeal, a little flour, milk, egg, and a touch of fat, it could be baked in advance and stored for several days. The bread was slightly crumbly, with a golden crust and a mild, sweet flavor that paired perfectly with cold or warm milk. To serve this quick supper, families often tore the cornbread into bite-sized pieces and placed them in a shallow bowl. Fresh milk, sometimes straight from a family cow or from a nearby dairy, was poured over the cornbread. As the milk soaked into the crumbs, it softened the texture and created a subtly sweet, hearty mixture that felt surprisingly filling. A pinch of sugar could be added if children were eating, making the meal feel a little indulgent despite its simplicity. This dish was not fancy, but it carried a deep sense of nostalgia for those who grew up eating it. The aroma of cornmeal, the gentle softness of milk-soaked bread, and the ease of preparation made it a comforting end to a busy day. In homes where other meals might have required more time or ingredients, cornbread and milk reminded families that even the simplest foods could be satisfying. Today, this supper is largely forgotten in modern kitchens. Yet for generations of Americans, It was a reliable, quick, and affordable way to provide warmth and sustenance, showing that sometimes the simplest combinations create the strongest memories. Hot dog and baked bean skillet. In post-World War II America, kitchens were filled with pantry staples that could be quickly transformed into warm, satisfying meals. One of the most practical and beloved combinations was the hot dog and baked bean skillet, a dish that could be ready in 10 minutes or less. It was inexpensive, simple, and perfectly suited for busy families juggling work, school, and household chores. Canned baked beans had become a common pantry item by the 1940s. They were easy to store, hearty, and offered a sweet, savory flavor that paired surprisingly well with the smoky taste of hot dogs. Hot dogs themselves were inexpensive, pre-cooked, and required minimal preparation. When combined in a skillet, they created a meal that was filling, comforting, and instantly recognizable to many American children. Preparation was straightforward. A few slices of hot dog were cut into bite-sized pieces and placed into a hot skillet. The canned beans were added directly from the can, often with a small splash of water or a knob of butter to loosen the mixture. As the ingredients heated, the flavors melded together, and the kitchen filled with a savory aroma that signaled supper was nearly ready. Some families served the skillet directly from the pan, while others ladled it over toast or crackers to stretch the meal further. A sprinkle of black pepper or a dash of mustard could be added, but even plain, it was satisfying and filling. This meal became a reliable solution for busy evenings. It required almost no preparation, minimal cleanup, and used ingredients that were already on hand. For children and adults alike, the combination of soft beans and sizzling hot dog pieces offered both comfort and convenience. Though largely forgotten today, the hot dog and baked beans skillet reminds us of an era when simple, affordable, and quick meals kept families nourished and brought them together around the table, even in the busiest of households. Egg noodle butter skillet. In the kitchens of mid-century America, egg noodles were a staple that could be cooked in minutes, making them perfect for a quick and satisfying supper. One of the most popular ways to prepare them was simply in a butter skillet, an uncomplicated dish that required very few ingredients but provided warmth and comfort for busy families. Egg noodles were inexpensive, filling, and quick to cook. In households where time and money were limited, they became a versatile base for countless meals. Often, leftover vegetables or bits of meat could be added, but the classic version relied solely on butter, salt, and a touch of pepper. Despite its simplicity, the dish had a rich, comforting flavor and a satisfying texture that made it a favorite among both children and adults. To prepare this meal, noodles were boiled until tender, then drained and added directly to a hot skillet with butter. The butter melted over the noodles, coating each strand in a glossy, rich layer. Stirring carefully ensured that the noodles didn't stick and that every bite carried that warm, buttery flavor. A pinch of salt and pepper brought out the subtle sweetness of the egg noodles, while the gentle aroma filled the kitchen, signaling that supper was ready. In many households, this dish appeared on busy weeknights when parents needed a meal that could be prepared while keeping an eye on children or household chores. Its speed, affordability, and comforting taste made it an indispensable part of mid-century kitchens. Today, egg noodle butter skillets are rarely featured in modern cookbooks, replaced by more complex pasta dishes. Yet for generations of American families, this quick and simple supper was a reliable favorite, proof that sometimes the simplest ingredients, handled with care, could create a meal that satisfied both the stomach and the heart. Quick salmon patty supper. In the mid-20th century, canned salmon was a pantry staple that allowed families to prepare a wholesome, protein-packed meal in just minutes. One of the most popular ways to use it was by making quick salmon patties, simple, inexpensive, and satisfying. This dish became a common supper in homes across America, especially for families who needed a fast, nourishing meal after a long day. Canned salmon was versatile and easy to store, making it ideal for busy households. Mixed with a few staple ingredients like breadcrumbs, an egg, and a touch of seasoning, it could be quickly shaped into small patties. Some cooks added finely chopped onions or a pinch of salt and pepper, enhancing the flavor without adding extra time or cost. These little patties could feed an entire family, stretching a modest can of salmon into a filling supper. Preparation was straightforward. A skillet was heated with a small amount of butter or oil, and the patties were placed in the pan. The sizzle of salmon hitting the hot surface filled the kitchen with a comforting aroma. Within minutes, the patties browned on each side, forming a crispy exterior while remaining tender inside. Many families served them alongside quick sides like buttered bread, steamed vegetables, or even mashed potatoes, creating a complete and satisfying meal in very little time. For many households, salmon patties became a trusted weekday supper. They required minimal effort, used inexpensive ingredients, and produced a hearty meal that both children and adults enjoyed. Though largely forgotten in modern kitchens, the quick salmon patty supper reminds us of a time when simplicity, speed, and frugality shaped family meals. It's a perfect example of how mid-century American households turned modest pantry staples into warm, comforting dinners that nourished both the body and the spirit. And there you have it, 10 quick, cheap vintage suppers that once filled American kitchens with warmth and comfort. These dishes may have faded from modern tables, but they carry the memories of families who relied on simple, affordable ingredients to create something nourishing in minutes. From creamed chipped beef on toast to quick salmon patties, each meal tells a story of resourcefulness, tradition, and care. If you enjoyed this journey through forgotten recipes, don't forget to subscribe to America's Lost Recipes and hit the bell so you never miss another taste of culinary history waiting to be rediscovered.